Welcome, everyone. Good morning. I hope everyone's having a great week so far. We're starting off our week today with two speakers. We have Dr. Matt Lukeman from the Department of Chemistry, and we have Maggie Nielsen, an academic librarian with the Vaughan Memorial Library. So today, these two wonderful panelists are going to be talking about critically evaluating information. So we hope you enjoy the session. We also, as always, have me, Anna Kiefty, here as the host and producer, but we also have Jeff Banks from the Department of Chemistry, and he's the director of Open Acadia. He's here as the backup producer again today. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A. We'll probably wait until the end to address most of the questions, but once we're ready to post them, we will get to those questions at the end of the session. So we hope you have a wonderful time in the session today, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. And go ahead, Maggie.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, for the really wonderful introduction. And thanks to Matt, my colleague who's going to be presenting with us today. So I guess one thing I wanted to start off by saying is that we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you during today's session, and there's a lot of things for you to be considering along the way. I can't emphasize enough how much help is available to you, either just at the end of the session, since we're going to be doing that Q&A, but we're also going to be pointing you to different places that you can get more information or get your questions asked, even beyond today. So there's lots of help available to you when it comes to looking at information and determining whether or not it's good, and we'll be letting you know how you can get that help. So today's presentation, before I launch in, I just want to emphasize how important the content we're talking about today is, and not necessarily just for your coursework, because it's incredibly important for your coursework that you're using good information. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But this stuff is also important just for your day-to-day lives and your decision-making and your relationships and how you communicate with others. So this information today goes beyond just what's useful for your coursework and really translates into your everyday life. So first, as my communications professor in my undergrad course said, first you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them what you're going to tell them. So I'm going to tell you today some of the things that we're going to talk about. The first thing we're going to touch on is all the ways we find, access, and use information. And I know that we all have our preferences of how we find information and where, and we're going to talk about a few different avenues and how we do that, how we find information to inform our coursework and the decisions we make in our lives. The next thing we'll talk about is, well, what is good information and what does that mean? So there's so much out there, and sometimes it can be really hard to discern what is a good piece of information, what is something we should be sharing, what is something that we should be using to support our coursework. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes information good and what makes it bad. Then we're going to touch on media, memes, and more. These are very common things that we run across in our day-to-day lives. So on social media, any number of avenues we share memes and media. So we're going to talk about that, what makes it good, what makes it bad, and what to keep your eye out for. Then Matt is going to jump in and talk about scholarly communication. So this is specifically how experts and scholars in any number of fields talk with one another. So it's not necessarily the information that you receive in your day-to-day, but it's how those experts communicate with one another. And that's going to be very, very important when you're studying, looking to support your coursework. Then Matt is also going to talk about peer review, and peer review is something that makes information all the more better. It gives it that higher quality, and Matt's going to tell you about what peer review is and why it's really important. And then we're going to jump back to me, and I'm going to tell you a few tips on actually finding that good information, because although it's important for us to know what good information is, and how to use it, it's also very important to know where to get that to begin with. Then we're going to talk a little bit about where to get help. and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that, I'm just going to jump right in. And it doesn't take me telling everyone on this session this, there is so much information out there. We are constantly bombarded with information from all different directions, especially now that we're living in a digital age. So it's very, very, very important for us as students, as scholars, as citizens to be able to tell what is good information, what information we should share, and what information that we should be using to do our coursework. So as I had mentioned a little bit in our introduction, there are a number of ways that we find, share, and receive information. And we all have preferences, how we get that information, how we find that information, but it can come from a ton of different places. Could be newspapers and news websites. I myself am a frequenter of, Washington Post. I look at CBC quite a bit for like local news, Nova Scotia news. There's any number of places that we find that information, particularly about current events. Social media, this is particularly where we might share information and receive information, though there might be a few of us on this session that's where they get information as well. TV, books and magazines, blogs and forums like Tumblr and Reddit. Friends and family, which, a lot of us get our information that way. I know myself, I still call my mother to this day to ask questions about certain things. So that is a legitimate and valid way that today we get our information, friends and family. Maybe talking directly to our teachers, professors, or educators. Oh, before I jump into the next slide, Matt, did you have any other ways that you find information or a preference for finding information?
Yeah, I guess I'll add is eventually when you're going to be involved in your coursework, you're going to be getting a lot of information, hopefully for your courses, from journals and from scholarly sources as well. And I see you have books and magazines there for sure, and maybe this falls under that category, but yeah, that's definitely another place you could be looking.
Absolutely. And we will be getting into scholarly materials and what makes them superior for your coursework and the best place to be finding your information. These are more so the mainstream ways that one might get their information. Great. I can jump back in here. So what is good information? And that, is a very vague term when we say, you need to use good information for your coursework, or you need good information for when you're, sharing something on social media. So there's a few different things that, as a librarian and as a scholar, and Matt can speak to this too, there's a few different things that I use in my toolkit when it comes to evaluating information that I come across and what makes it good. So the first piece is that it's accurate, it is reliable, it's reputable, and it's current. So I have an asterisk next to current because when we study some topics, information published a long time ago is still important and still reliable. So for me, one of the first things that comes into my mind is maybe you're studying an historical event. Well, something that's published on that historical event, perhaps around the time that was happening, it doesn't mean that it's not reliable because it's old. That is something that happened at the time, and so something published at the time would still be important and still be something that you could rely on. So currency is not necessarily always the number one thing that sort of tells you whether or not information is good. Yeah. Matt, I don't know if you have any thoughts on maybe a topic that currency would be super important.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. So a great example might be, say, health and nutrition, where, if you have a source that's saying, oh, it's really safe to eat, as much liver or you name it, some food as you want, but the research that is behind that is 50 years old, that very well may have been replaced by better, newer information, more studies and so on that has overturned that. So a great example of that is actually eggs. I think the guidance on how many eggs you should be eating every week has yo-yoed back and forth from, lots of eggs, no eggs, lots of eggs, keeps going back and forth. So yeah, you could definitely, if you had some dated information on that, be led to make some wrong decisions.
Yeah, that is a really great example. I definitely think like health and medicine sort of out the gate, but I also think of things like in technology or computer science. Information in medicine and health and in something like computer science can become obsolete within minutes sometimes.
Yeah.
So in some places, in some disciplines and some topics, currency is of the utmost importance. But again, if you're studying something historical, or maybe you're actually looking at the history of medicine, the publication of things, a long time ago would still be relevant and information that you could use because it's actually the topic you're looking at. So currency is very important most of the time, but for some disciplines, some topics, you're going to be tapping into old information. And depending on the discipline, your professor may say, oh, something from 20 years ago is fine, whereas another professor of yours might say, no, I need something that's published within the last year. So it's going to differ, and your professors might actually have different ideas of timeframes they want for the information that you're using. And I see this a lot as a librarian. I've done teaching where the time doesn't matter when a paper is published. And I've also done teaching where the professor wants all the information published within the last year. So it really depends too on, if you're writing a paper, what your professor wants in terms of, the publication date of your material. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. So there's an age-old technique in the library world that I was happy to introduce Matt to, and that is the CRAAP method. So this is a way that you can actually see whether or not your sources are good or not. And there's like sort of a basic framework that you can apply and keep in your head when you're looking at a specific source. So CRAAP stands for the currency, the relevancy, the authority, the accuracy, and the purpose of the information that you're looking at. So there's a number of questions you can ask yourself when you're looking at a piece of information that surround these particular topics. So evaluating sources with CRAAP is a very common librarian technique, and I think there might be some librarians on the call too, so they're going to be very familiar with this technique. One thing I will say though is that this is a pretty basic and introductory level assessment. So as you move through your university degree, you're going to sort of need to up your skills in terms of evaluating information, because there's going to be scholarly information out there that, passes all the tests in terms of the CRAAP test, but might still need further critical evaluation with a more fine-tooth comb, essentially. And Matt might talk about that a little bit when it comes to scholarly communication, but this CRAAP method is a very basic introductory way to sort of weasel out bad information and identify the good stuff. So the first C is currency, and this is the timeliness of the information. So we have a few questions here that you can ask yourself, like when was it published? Has that information been revised or updated? And that's something that Matt spoke to really well in terms of the egg story and how they keep fluctuating, in and out of our lives as good and bad things. So you have to say, well, is this information been revised since 50 years ago when they're saying you should eat 10 eggs a day? There might be new information out there. So that is something to be asking yourself in terms of currency as well. Is the information current or out of date, which ties back to that other piece? And are the links functional? So when you're looking at information online, and one of the things you do want to look for is links to maybe an original research article or other sources to support that information. So making sure that those links still work and that, they aren't dead links and that information is still available is also a very important thing to look for. So currency is the first C. Then we have relevance, and that's the importance of the information to your needs. So I guess for me, a good example of this is you're writing a paper for a university level course and you find a source that, could be considered reliable and good, but its audience is for maybe young adults. So that really speaks to the relevance of that information and whether or not that's something you should use as a scholarly source in a paper. So there might be other sources out there that are best suited for your need. And so you have to make sure that the information you're using is at an appropriate level for your coursework. So unfortunately, you know, unless it's a paper on kids' stories, maybe not using something that was sort of created for young adults would be the best. So it has to essentially match up with the work you're doing, and that information has to suit your need. The next important piece is authority and the source of the information. Now, for me, this is probably one of the biggest ones. Despite all of these being very important, where that information is coming from is incredibly important. So who is the author, the publisher? Where is this coming from? Does the person who is writing or publishing this information actually have the credentials and experience to speak to that topic? Are they affiliated with a research institution? Are they affiliated with a university? What are their qualifications? We all know that you can pretty much put any information out there on the internet, and you don't have to have any qualifications or any expertise, and it's very easy to convince folks that you do. So the authority and where that information comes from is of the utmost importance. And if you don't know, you can always ask a librarian or ask your professor about a particular source. Is there anything you wanted to add along the way, Matt? I'm just sort of going through, but interrupt me if need be.
You're doing great.
Great. Okay, perfect.
But no, these are all ringing bells in my head too. I mean, the relevance one, I just thought for a second there of Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading when he was training, you know, like probably many top athletes, he was consuming around 8,000 calories a day, which is probably 4 times more than the average person needs. But he was burning it all, you know, with all his training and everything. And I just remember thinking, you know, the advice to eat 8,000 calories in a day, depending on your audience, that advice would sound very different for different groups of people.
That's very true, and an excellent example, because yeah, not everything, even if something might be credible and useful in a particular situation, it doesn't mean it's suitable for all audiences. And we'll also get into audience too when we talk about scholarly communication and peer review, because the audience for how scholars communicate is themselves within the scholarly community and other experts. So that's a very important piece that we'll be talking about later as well.
On the authority piece, one thing that you can actually see quite a bit out in the media are people that do have the credentials, often medical doctors, making claims that are maybe not supported by evidence or not in line with sort of mainstream organizations like Health Canada, World Health Organization. So this is a tricky one too, because just because somebody is presenting information and they have that doctor in front of their name or PhD behind their name, still that's not a slam dunk guarantee that it's going to be accurate information either.
Absolutely. And that sort of plays back to finding that information in other places as well. So you can have a doctor that says, you know, these things are great, but if what they're saying does go against, you know, the mainstream and is contradictory to sort of scientific consensus on a particular topic, then you have to be very cautious, and essentially you are trying to find that information in other places. And if you can't, then that really speaks to the quality of your source and sort of the legitimacy of that expert, even though they have the credentials. So that is an excellent point to make. You went away from my screen, Matt. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Nothing changed on my end.
All right. I accidentally minimized you, so you disappeared and don't know where you went to, but I can still hear you.
Minimize my contributions here.
No, not intended to do that at all. Just your face. Just your face.
Well, I understand that much.
Oh, God. Okay, let's move on to accuracy. And so that's the reliability, truthfulness, and the correctness of the content. So this all of these really interplay with one another, and speaks to what Matt was just talking about in terms of, well, this person has, a doctorate, but what they're saying isn't jiving with like the entire medical community. And that comes back to this accuracy piece and how reliable that information is. So thinking about where that came from and is it supported by evidence? So that is something that you would see in a consensus from a scientific or medical community, for example. There's evidence to support what the medical association is saying or what the government is saying. So is there evidence to actually back up what this source is saying? Has it been reviewed by others? So we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but essentially, have other experts looked at this information and agreed that it is true and correct? That's a very important question to ask. Can you verify any of the information in another source? So I spoke to that a little bit as well. Well, this doctor is saying something about this particular treatment, but no other doctors are saying that. So there's a big red flag for you. And does the language seem unbiased? And we're going to get into bias a little more, but when they're talking, does it seem that they have an agenda and are trying to push a particular idea or philosophy in their writing? So that's another very important piece to be asking yourself.
Often what I see for the purpose is usually to sell you something. So often if I'm on a website or news source that is trying to sell a product to me, right away a red flag goes up about the information that they're giving me, that information is likely strongly biased. Absolutely.
And I think you've probably seen this too. I've read, a research paper that at the very end was like, oh, this was sponsored by Coca-Cola or something along those lines. So it even exists in the research world where folks have an agenda about what they're doing, but always look to see whether or not the source is trying to push a certain fact or opinion on you, and whether or not they have a goal. And it could be, like Matt has mentioned, that they're trying to sell you something, which is a huge red flag. But there could be other, there could be political, economic, any number of reasons why someone might be putting information out there. And it's really important to kind of get to the bottom about why they might be putting that information out there. And we'll see that a little more when we get into some examples. Is there anything else, Matt, before I jump into examples?
No, go right ahead.
Great. So we're actually going to take a look at a few different websites, and Matt and I are going to chat a little bit about what we see when we look at them and things that we notice, things that we should be paying attention to, and things that you all should be paying attention to as you look at information online. So I'm just going to pause temporarily to stop sharing and then share my other screen. Oh, wrong one. Too many options. Again, wrong one. Thank goodness everyone is so patient.
Just there's a question there in the chat, Maggie. I don't know if while we're switching it, we want to address that one.
Yeah.
The question is, do you have any tips for finding the most current and accurate? Oh, it disappeared. Okay, here we go. Do you have any tips for finding the most current and accurate information for any topic, especially when it's changing so often?
Yes, actually I do. And I'm wondering if we should do that now or when we go into the tips and tricks. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe we deal with them as they appear in our presentation.
So do it now.
Well, I don't care. If we're going to kind of go over it again in the tips and tricks, maybe we can just
yeah, like we will talk about this. Because I'm going to talk about a few different techniques you can use in Google in terms of like finding the most current news story and finding government information and any number of things. So yeah, maybe we'll leave that for the tips and tricks section, where we will talk about that type of thing. But it is an excellent question and something that's going to be very important and valuable skills for all of you to have, moving forward in your degree and beyond. So we definitely will touch on those things.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so this is the first one, Matt. I'm going to put it up and you see what you think of it so far, and you can tell me to move up and down, or what is one of the first things you notice?
First thing I look for is I look along the top, the banners at the top, to see what the source is, like who is providing this information.
Mm-hmm.
So you see Canadian Mental Health Association. So the Canadian Mental Health Association is it's an organization that is, obviously trying to promote mental health, probably or possibly also lobby for increased support and input for mental health. So if you were to look maybe at what their motivations might be, first of all, a motivation obviously is to help people get support and understand their own mental health more clearly, where they might get supports and so on. But another big motivation an organization like this might have is to, as much as possible, shine a great big spotlight on this topic, to try to make this topic, more in the public eye so that it gets more attention and more funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Anything else that you notice about that? What do you think about in terms of reliability and using the information that you find on the site in a paper, for example?
So one thing that I noticed, just briefly reading the text, is there's no citations that I can see, and maybe there's something at the bottom, but there's no author's name, there's no sources for any of the information listed. So I have no idea if this is just sort of off the top of somebody's head, or if this is sort of a well-researched, well-grounded in evidence piece of information here. Mm-hmm. So I would be extremely reluctant to cite this as a source in an academic paper.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great observations. And I guess too, for me, I know the Canadian Mental Health Association is a quite well-respected, considered to be a bit of an authority on these types of things, but I wouldn't necessarily totally discredit this. It would really depend on the context and I guess in which it's being used in a scholarly paper, whether there's maybe speaking to the work of the Mental Health Association or that kind of thing. So a lot of this stuff is really contextual, but Matt makes really great points about the lack of citations within this work, the lack of an author, and the fact that they are an association that might have an agenda that is pushing a particular idea or a particular topic. So I think this one is a good example of not necessarily 100% black and white. There might be some gray in terms of the Canadian Mental Health Association and relying on their information. So this was one of the ones that I chose that was a little bit more maybe a few question marks, really depending on what you're doing with that information. So this one is a good demonstration of something that may not be so clear cut. So let's go to the next one. This one is going to be more obvious.
So if you don't recognize the symbol at the top, that's the Conservative Party of Canada. Mm-hmm. So obviously this is going to be politically motivated.
Yep.
Any piece of information that comes from a political party, the only reason they're communicating it is to get across sort of a political idea.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I chose Conservative, but it's any political party. If I went to the NDP website or the Green website or the Liberal website, this is all the same in terms of motivation. Everyone has an agenda that they're trying to push. One thing that I really noticed about this, and you're going to see it from political parties, is the language in which they're addressing a particular topic. I think, Trudeau Liberal fails. There was another piece in here. about, it's not surprising that, Mr. Spendren believed that he could get away with this from Justin Trudeau. So there's a lot of bias. There's a lot of, the language is clearly conveying a message about how they feel about the Liberal Party, and it's not a neutral language. They're they're basically saying that Trudeau is a crook, and et cetera, et cetera. So when you start to read information online where it seems quite obvious that the author or the organization has something against maybe another party or something, the way they're talking about the information is really key, and that's something that we see here big time. One thing I do notice about this site is just visually, it does give you that sense of legitimacy because it's a very nice, clean-cut looking website. It seems very legitimate, and you're going to come across that type of website a lot, and they can really disguise themselves even just by looking professional and by looking like they know what they're talking about. So that's another red flag that you should be thinking about as well. Sorry, Matt, were you going to say something? I thought you were going to.
Yeah, no, just exaggeration. If you're reading an article and it seems like they're using a lot of exaggeration, that's a sign for me that they're trying to amplify at least what the actual facts are.
Right. Yeah, and that's so, like, even if we just look at this line here, if re-elected, Justin Trudeau will continue to break laws. It's that language that that you've pointed out is very, very important when we're looking at this information. All right, let's try our next one.
All right, so first thing I look at again is the source in the top, Government of Canada, and this is from Health Canada. And in my mind, at least, Health Canada is one of the most trustworthy organizations. These are large national organizations. What you'll notice is there's lots of different types of organizations like this. There's the CDC in the US, there is the World Health Organization. Pretty well every country has sort of a national health body like Health Canada. And what you'll notice is if you look at guidance from any of these, they're almost all identical. They're almost all in lockstep, and they're almost all following from the same evidence. And maybe this isn't obvious necessarily from just looking at the website, at least not to me, because as Maggie correctly pointed out, it's easy to sort of put a website out that looks clean and looks professional and looks authoritative, like we just saw. But this is one that I would personally trust.
Yes, yeah, and this was one of my examples of a really good source. In terms too of like last updated 2020, May 13th, 2020, it's quite current. It does come from the Government of Canada, very well respected in terms of, it's coming from Health Canada. It's our government health governing body. This to me would be a really great source. One thing though I did want to say about government bodies like this is that sometimes a socio-political or socioeconomic situation in a given country can impact the information that, government bodies share. So I think a prime example right now is a lot of uncertainty surrounding what the EPA in the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency, what are they promoting currently? So despite it being the EPA, it's the EPA. To us, the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, like that to us would be considered a very, very good source. But given some of the current socio-political things going on, more so political, in the United States, there's some question about whether or not the EPA is accurately going to be sharing information. Same with the CDC, as I'm sure you've seen in the news. So for us looking at this, yeah, I feel 100% confident that I could use information from this, but just be cognizant of when you're looking at government body institutions and the information they're putting out, is that sometimes that can still be impacted in negative ways depending on, the authority in that country.
Yeah, we had the same problem in Canada back when Harper was Prime Minister. when there was sort of a gag order on a lot of scientists, particularly scientists working in the environment. These would be government scientists working for organizations like Environment Canada. And it's not necessarily that wrong information was being published, but it was maybe filtered, maybe is a good way to describe it.
Controlled.
Controlled.
Yeah, exactly. So that is something that we really have to keep an eye on when it comes to this information, because it is authoritative, like we know this, but there could be information missing or controlled or presented in a way that isn't, that I wouldn't want to rely on. So yeah. And I remember the scientists being gagged and folks really feeling like there was too much control over what was being communicated, especially with the public. So yeah, can look real legit and be legit, but it's also good to be cognizant of the other sort of social or political things going on around at the time when you're looking at that information. Okay, this is the last one. I'm already laughing. You shouldn't give it away.
Wow, okay. Louder with Crowder.
Yeah, I don't know who that guy is.
This looks maybe more of like, I don't know, like a personal kind of vlog, yeah, and just the graphic you can see with the big American flag, and I don't know if those are little explosions or what, but to me this screams sort of right-wing American viewpoint. And NASA now says burning fossil fuels cools the planet. Okay, so this runs contrary to what almost every single scientific report for the last 25 years has published. You see the date there is not super current, but definitely you will find all kinds, everything that you, as certain as we may be about some piece of information, you will find a website claiming the opposite.
Like flat Earth, like the Earth is flat.
Yep.
Yeah. And one thing for me too here is like, who's Courtney Kirchhoff? Who are you? Like, why do you have this authority to, report this and talk about it in any way? The date was something for me. Yeah, just everything to do with this banner was suspect. Yeah, the whole thing, you're right. It just screams misinformation. It screams bias. It screams an agenda. It's absolute trash. And I actually found this through Snopes, because this whole concept that NASA is saying, fossil fuels cool the planet had actually gone viral. And Snopes took it on as something that they needed to debunk. So I found it through there. But this is just a prime example of trash, of a trash article. And it has no place in A, informing your opinion on something, but B, in scholarly work or the work that you're going to do, as an undergraduate. It has no place in really anywhere. Let alone, just looking at it now is like burning my eyes. So it's absolutely awful. We're just going to jump out of here. That was really great, Matt. Thank you, because I think we covered it, something that looks legitimate and maybe could be used, something that's clearly biased, something that's clearly trash, and something that looks perfect, but maybe in another country or in another time, it might not be 100% reliable. So I think we covered a good span.
One thing I just might add is that articles like this, I often find, are sort of centered around a small kernel of truth. And a good example that comes to mind is if you look at the sea ice coverage in the Arctic, it's been dropping, for 15, 20 years. And every year it goes down a little bit, but there's some variation in the data. So it kind of goes up and down and up and down. It's trending downward strongly over the long term. But 1 year might be up slightly from the previous year just because of variation in the data. And every year you see a small little uptick from the previous year. You'll be flooded with articles like this saying, oh, the ice is coming back, the ice is healing, you know, the Arctic is getting better.
Nature is healing.
That's right. And it's like, no, look at the trend, look at the long-term trend, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, you and I had this conversation the other day about an article I had seen online that had said that the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, it's a global organization, had said that veganism was the answer to global warming. And they had a link to this report from the FAO, and I was like, I just can't see the FAO saying this. So I actually went to the FAO report, which is another tip actually for everybody watching. If you're reading a news report and they're citing a research article, go check out that research article. They should be linking to it. And if you can't have access behind a paywall, you can try to see if you can find it through the library, but you should always go and check out that original research that's being reported on. So that's a little tip that comes from this story. So I went to this report, and what it had said that was that the bulk of greenhouse gases and global warming had to do with animal agriculture. So animal agriculture is a big culprit, but this report was not suggesting that veganism therefore is the answer. So there was this idea came from a place of truth that animal agriculture is a big contributor, but it was spun in a way to say, well, therefore the FAO is saying veganism is the only answer to save the planet. So that's another way that things can look, ooh, they had a reliable source, but they were using that information to frame what they wanted to promote. So a really great examples there in terms of a kernel of truth or, a little factoid can be used in some very dangerous and misinformed ways. So that's a great example. And thank you, Matt, for bringing that up. So I think now go back into the presentation. And there we go. Oops. Started on the wrong slide. There we go. Perfect. So now we're going to talk about media, memes, and more. And the reason that we talk about this in particular is because a lot of us spend time on social media, and that's where we see a lot of information, share a lot of information, and often inform our opinions or our perspectives on things using social media, which is not necessarily a good thing, but we receive a lot of information that way. So it's very important that we talk about, how we share that information on social media and how we can look at it critically as we are scrolling through our Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. So as I just mentioned, we receive a lot of information through social media, and it can be news articles, videos, memes. I friends on my Facebook, Instagram, they share it in any number of ways, and I'm sure everyone here on their social network sees a whole slew of different formats of information that come across their timeline. And it is a way we communicate with one another and discuss our ideas and develop relationships and friendships through our social media. We share a funny meme, or we share a news article that was, particularly relevant to something happening in our community, and you can connect with people that way. So it can be risky in a lot of ways for all the reasons that we've been talking about, but it's an important way that we now in this day and age, share information and communicate with one another. Despite that, we still really need to be critical of the information we share and see and use to inform ourselves on social media, because we know that misinformation and biased media can run rampant on these platforms. I think Matt and I were talking about, we all have that uncle or someone who's sharing like some article that makes no sense. For a while there, I saw a few people on Facebook sharing that Steven Spielberg was abusing the dinosaurs. on the set of Jurassic Park, and that originated from an Onion article, I believe, which we'll talk about too, satire. But this is the reason that we need to be so critical of the information that we come across. A lot of memes get shared that really simplify complex issues and maybe present misinformation. I don't know, Matt, is there any like prime examples of like information you've seen on one of your social media platforms that you were just like, what?
Oh, tons. And
yeah, I know, there's so many.
COVID, right? With COVID and masks and how, you know, you wear a mask, it'll cause all these problems, and masks aren't effective, and all this kind of stuff, right? Like there's every day there's something new.
There is something new, and I know for the folks of us who consider themselves informed, and it can be very exhausting to have conversations online with people too who are quite set in their ways and very convinced that their information is good. So it can also be a very frustrating place. Sometimes I just have to avoid it altogether, especially when there's stuff happening in the world like COVID-19. There's going to be a lot of misinformation spread with big global events, and it's important that we're extra critical, especially now when misinformation, it can literally kill people. So we have to be very, very vigilant in what we share and what we use and see. So it can seem harmless though, because you and I are talking about things that are like pretty serious in terms of like sharing misinformation about COVID, but it can also be harmless or seem harmless and be sort of funny. So poor Tim Allen, I don't know how many times his death has been wrongly reported. And it happens to celebrities all the time. So I loved this tweet about, imagine my surprise to wake up this morning and discover that I'm dead. So sometimes misinformation can seem harmless-ish or be even funny. This next one was about Sandra the orangutan started washing her hands because she saw the zookeepers doing it during the COVID-19 crisis. That's not true at all. Long before the COVID-19 crisis, apparently Sandra the orangutan could wash her hands. So this actually speaks to the currency of information as well. And it seems like a great, feel-good, use this information, wash your hands like Sandra the orangutan, but it is indeed not accurate. She knew how to do this before the crisis. There was also, I'm laughing even as this comes up, there was also a screenshot of during the credits of Cats, and someone screenshotted it and said that it was a list of people who had died during the production of Cats, which makes no sense at all. But people were convinced that this screenshot with names were a list of people who died during the making of that film. So this is a tweet, that someone is so outraged. How many people? Why did so many people die during the production of Cats? Well, they didn't. It was just a screenshot from the credits.
They were just the people that wanted to die.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I haven't seen it, but I hear it's disturbing in a variety of different ways. And then this last one I laughed out loud at, Titanic 2, The Return of Jack. So this one actually comes, it was an art student, like someone who's doing animation and digital art and like video production, created a fake trailer for Titanic 2, The Return of Jack, and people saw this and were convinced it was real and shared it everywhere. That this whole thing just really cracks me up. But a prime example, like it's funny and can seem harmless, this type of misinformation, but it can also be very, very serious. I don't know if you have any other good examples you've seen, Matt, of hilarious misinformation.
Well, the Tim Allen one is funny. I've seen lots of different people experience people claiming they were dead so many times, right?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the most upsetting ones is the Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
Whenever I see like a fake Morgan Freeman thing, my initial reaction is always like, oh, is he? And then I double check and he never is. But that poor man has been dead, I don't know how many times, according to social media. Like it happens all the time.
And when he finally does die, you're not going to believe it.
No, it'll be like The Boy Who Cried Wolf. I'll just be like, right. No, I'll have to corroborate the story in like 10 different sources to actually believe that he has passed away. So it's one of those things, like it can seem like funny or harmless, but as you'll see, it can also be very harmful and result in people being hurt, or in some cases, death can be associated with that, or a violation of a crime. Any number of things can happen with misinformation. So this was a meme or a piece that I saw online. Carbon dioxide toxicity, and the accompanying tweet said, "This is hypercapnia. It can be caused by rebreathing your own exhaled CO2 by wearing a mask continuously." So this is a prime example of incredibly harmful misinformation. We need to be wearing masks. We need to be following the directives of our health authorities and of science and of epidemiologists, medical professionals, not Angela Johnson from Twitter, who is telling you that if you wear your mask, you will die of carbon dioxide poisoning.
I saw a funny tweet somebody wrote about these claims about masks, and it said, "How is it that the masks simultaneously do not let CO2 or oxygen through, but also provide no protection against the coronavirus?" It's like, it either lets them both through or lets neither through, right?
It just, the ridiculousness of this whole thing is mind-boggling to me. And the whole time I've been like reading this terrible information about this, I'm like, surgeons have been, in 10-hour surgeries wearing masks for however long that has been a thing. Like, there's not a whole lot of using just sort of common sense too with some of these claims. It's crazy town. So this one was one of the ones that I spotted that I thought was particularly harmful, especially now. Like, we need to be following those directives. It's very important. This is another one that NASA admits that climate change occurs because of the Earth's solar orbit and not because of SUVs and fossil fuels. And this might be another one of those ones, Matt, that, there's like one small phrase that was used by NASA at some point that maybe said specifically SUVs don't do this. And then it gets turned into, a whole argument that it has nothing to do with vehicles. So again, another harmful use of misinformation and pushing an agenda. And this is the anti-climate change agenda, or the climate change deniers. And then this one was just straight up like, it was blown wide open and you can see here it says "in conspiracies," like this was on a conspiracy page. And Bill Gates admits vaccines their best way to depopulate. So this was another Snopes one. They straight up, discovered he did not say this at all. I think it was a lookalike.
Oh, really?
There was like a lookalike dude in some video who, said these things, and it got spread rampantly that he had actually said that it was the best way to depopulate. It's just insane.
Or it was not the Bill Gates of Microsoft. It was just some guy named Bill Gates.
Oh yeah, Bill Gates from down the road.
Yeah.
just my neighbor or whatever. So I actually do specifically talk about memes because I love memes. You probably love memes. Everybody loves a good meme. They can be very funny or clever ways to express, our thoughts or opinions in, a very simple way. But they often do drastically minimize or simplify a topic. Usually it's just an image with a few words or something, and, can really overlook some complexities, particularly when we're talking about, social issues or political issues. Memes can really glaze over some things that are much more complex and cannot be captured by a picture in a few words. But they can be very effective at communicating that message. And although there might be a grain of truth sometimes, like Matt had mentioned with news stories, the same goes for memes. There might be a grain of truth, but they really aren't a good way to inform your opinion or an argument. So they can be super funny. This is actually one of my more favorite recent ones because I think BuzzFeed did a video where everything in it was a cake. So there was like toilet paper rolls, it was cake. Shoes, cake. Everything in it was cake. So this became a huge meme that everything in our lives are cake. So I really, really loved this one. And of course, a classic office meme, you know, being invited anywhere. Not Mrs. for the World, but if something else came up, I would definitely not go. I mean, I love The Office anyway, and I love a good office meme. And then one particularly relevant to now is everyone in their online classes right now. And I can see Matt as one of these creatures right here, right now, in my corner of my screen.
Which one am I?
I don't know. You might be. You might be the lizard.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at too. So
yeah, I think I would be the hamster. That's the expression on my face, you know, most of the time anyway. So
camera up like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd have to get, you know, a little bit closer and look really freaked out. So they can be really funny, and I mean, I enjoy memes as much as the next person. But again, just like those news articles, just like that, you know, that information, those videos people are sharing, they can also be really dangerous and misleading. So this was one that I found. Another group that was, you know, climate change denying and just saying that it's just, you know, it's extreme. It's caused by the extreme weather boogeyman, essentially making fun of the folks that are the scientists and experts who are studying climate change and very much confirm that it is happening. So again, this can be a very dangerous mechanism to share information. Anti-vaxxing memes. I have an immune system, so no vaccines are needed. You know, what can I say about this? Love the Matrix, but just such bad information. We very much need vaccines, and we have historical and epidemiological evidence to support that. So, again, a harmful meme, and one that comes from groups who are anti-mask wearing. Yeah, I don't have much to say about any of these. They're all trash. Matt, anything else you want to mention about these memes?
Just an interesting thing popped into my head. Have you heard of the David Avocado Wolf effect?
No. What? The David Avocado?
Wolf. He's a personality, internet personality, who very conspiracy theorist, very extreme left wing in terms of, you know, anti-medical system, like everything.
Right, okay, yeah.
But what he does is he creates like dozens of memes every week that are just extremely heartwarming, like very positive, very happy ones. And then like every 15 or so, he'll inject a really nasty one like these. And so what ends up happening is all these wholesome, heartwarming ones get spread around like crazy, and it gains them followers. So it's sort of a technique to get the more, you know, and so they call this the David Avocado Wolf effect, which is sort of to bait people into becoming a follower by providing content which isn't really the content that you're intending them to consume.
What a tactic. Wow.
And if you go on, it's funny because if you go on his Facebook page, it's like, you know, 61 of your friends follow David Avocado Wolf. And it's because, yeah, probably this is why, right? They've been seeing these other memes, and yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm gonna have to like look into this because I had no idea this David Avocado Wolf effect existed. That's fascinating, and a good thing for everyone, you know, in this session to know about, because that would be incredibly misleading, and you know, some very intelligent folks might be duped by that. So wow. Okay. Good to know. Well, what time are we at? I feel like we're
at 11.
Okay, we're at 11. Perfect. Okay. So next we are just going to touch on news sources, because news is a very good way for you to get information, but they really, really, really do matter. And when we talk about the CRAAP method, there's actually a few extra layers when it comes to like fake news and spotting fake news. One thing is the satire piece. There's lots of satire news out there. I love satire news, but it is important to be able to, you know, tell the difference and spot it. And bias, even though it is mentioned in the CRAAP method as in the purpose piece, bias is incredibly important when it comes to news sources. So it's very important to check your bias in the news and in yourself. So if you have an idea set in your mind that, something is a certain way and you're only seeking news to support that idea that you have in your mind, that's not very good detective work. That's not good scholarly work. And that's just not a good way to sort of operate in the world. So you have to be aware in yourself if you have biases that you are looking to confirm when you're looking for news and other information as well. So news can be put out into the world without a neutral or objective purpose of just reporting fact. There are arguably some news sources that I would say are pretty much neutral and objective in their purpose for reporting just the facts, but it's also arguable that many, if not most, do have a leaning in some particular way or a bias, even if it is very, very small. So this is something to be very cognizant of when you're looking at your news sources. And of all things, just to take away from this, it's so important to rely on reputable and transparent news sources that have high journalistic quality integrity, especially if you are writing a paper for one of your courses and you need to cite a news source. It is very important that that news source is reputable and is providing as much as possible the most neutral or objective reporting of the facts. What's your favorite news source, Matt?
I think I have a weird approach to news. Often what I do, I have two news sources I go to, and I like, so one of them I'll say is Fox News, and one of them is CNN. And I find CNN very left-leaning and Fox News very right-leaning, and I find if I put the two together...
That is a very interesting strategy.
Yeah. Besides that, it would probably be CBC, and I actually like, getting it very locally, so Chronicle Herald is another one that I like to go to.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's good. I like hearing about like how other people get their news sources. I've never before heard of like getting the average between two news sources.
Can I just say that that's a real chemist thing to say? It's like two reagents creating this product that is the in-between.
Yes, that's exactly what it feels like. Very chemist.
Part of it, I think, is just
hilarious.
entertainment too. I find like sometimes the takes are so extreme on both sides, and I just know the truth is somewhere in the middle.
I have to admit I'm a chemist, and that's my approach as well. So it is a
wow. Chemist. I did not even know this was an approach that existed. Like, I'm mind blown right now, and I think it's awesome. Like, it just goes to show how different we all are when it comes to getting our news. And this diagram here sort of speaks to the types of biases that exist in the news. One thing that like Matt and I both noticed about this is that any of these diagrams you see are heavily American. So I went ahead and went in and put in some more, a couple Canadian content things that lie more central to the mainstream, a little bit higher in terms of standards. So we have like the CBC and Globe and Mail and Toronto Star, getting up into the analytical and complex in terms of the content they report. There's way too much to go into like what all of these mean. It's more so to demonstrate that different news sources do very much have leanings, and it can be left or right. And what you're aiming for is stuff that lies in the middle and anything above sort of the meets high standards. Now, it has local TV and news and CNN down here and sort of the more basic central ground. And I just want to say that tapping into local news and newspapers and programming, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that if you want to be up to date on what's happening in your community. And you might actually have to reference, depending on the topic, a local newspaper or local news. And there's nothing wrong with that. When you're looking at big global sort of global trends like COVID-19, for example, or just big news stories that aren't necessarily local, you want to be aiming for, center and up in terms of your sources. Because once you start going either way, you're getting into confirming those existing biases, which I was talking about before. So you're looking to confirm what you think about something. And when you go in either direction past the center, you're starting to get into areas that, aren't quite reputable and are just essentially what you want to read, what the reader is looking to read to confirm what they think.
Something else to be careful of is I find news sources more and more are sort of tracking what articles you read, and next time you go, they give you more of the same.
Yep.
So
that's exactly it.
So sometimes where you may place a news source here, it's actually different for each individual person because it's customized a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's a very good point. And we have lots of mechanisms, whether it be news or Amazon or whatever, tracking us and our preferences and then only presenting information in a certain way. So that's a really great point. So last, of course, I had to talk about some Onion because I love the Onion and I love the Beaverton. But like I had mentioned before, I saw that that Onion article that that had been shared as if it was real news about Steven Spielberg abusing the dinosaurs on the Jurassic Park set, and it was an Onion headline. So I think we probably also know a person in our lives on our social media who has shared a satirical article and thought it was real. So if a headline really seems too silly to be true, they probably aren't. Always look to see if it's a satirical website or news site. The Onion is brilliant and has amazing headlines, and they're very, very funny, but they are not true. And it's always important to, double check if something seems really silly and hilarious. It's probably satire. Picking these out was incredibly difficult. I had so many great headlines that I was like cackling at as I was trying to put together this presentation, but these were two of my favorites, especially the math one, because I'm not very good at math, and that spoke to me, that headline.
It could be real.
Yeah, right? They unveil the newer, harder math. So to get to the bottom of that news story, there's a few different ways that you can check out the legitimacy of some content that's going around a viral news story. Snopes is my favorite. They do Canadian content too, like it's international. They will basically just take on anything that's sort of circulating the internet. Whereas the other two that I have here, like the Duke Reporters Lab and factcheck.org, tend to be obviously more focused on American content. So if Snopes is my number one, I don't know. Do you have any others that you go to, Matt, or ways that you kind of look?
I use Snopes too. You'd be surprised. Almost everything I've ever looked for is there. So
their coverage is amazing. So that tends to be my go-to as well. But there are others out there. But again, mostly American focused. So now it's on to you, Matt, to talk about some scholarly communication.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So a lot of what we've been just speaking about has been more about sort of public presentation of information about, news sources that are easily available on the internet, social media that's sort of available to everybody. For scholarly communication, and this is what we're really going to be asking you to be doing over the next couple of years at Acadia, there's sort of a different set of expectations and standards that we kind of expect, or that is expected. And so, I mean, I'm a chemist. I did a PhD, which means I spent 4 years doing research in a lab, but also the most important part of doing research is then communicating your results. So that means a number of different things. So different ways that I would communicate with the public. I'd say the primary way we would communicate with the public is by writing articles and journals. And so these articles get published, and then they're communicated with other experts who can then read them. Problem with these, I would say, for sort of the general public and trying to read journals, is they're often written in a very high level, extremely technical, extremely dense format. So they're not very easy for people to digest unless you are also an expert in that field. So what you often see is the results of research, when it ends up being presented to the public through news or through all these other sources that we've talked about, typically it's not the person who made the discoveries that are doing that communication. There's often science journalists or historical journalists or journalists for any sort of field who are sort of filtering the high level technical information down to a level that can be more easily digested. If it's a big discovery, what happens is, you could be interviewed for the news, you could be interviewed for TV or all these sorts of things. Another main way that experts communicate with each other is to give presentations, go to conferences, and again, this is sort of preaching to the choir, because you're speaking to somebody who already kind of knows. You see books from academic presses or scholarly publishers. Often, at least in science, I know books are sort of amalgamations of information that's already been presented or published as journals. So there's, I guess, another issue I would bring up with having non-experts jump in and read scholarly journals right away is I often view journals as being almost like a long conversation between experts. And any specific article is almost like the next piece of a long conversation. And it's very difficult to understand the context of that piece of that single article without having heard the whole conversation all the way along. So this is where books really come in. I think books are great for sort of distilling that whole long conversation into sort of a whole piece. Because I'm an expert in certain areas of chemistry, but there's other areas I know almost nothing about. So if I go and I read a single article, I may end up coming to conclusions that aren't really what this article is stating, even though I'd have probably a pretty good level of understanding and knowledge compared to most people. You see also there's conferences, social media to some extent. A lot of scientists and a lot of other academics are on social media. I'd say Twitter is probably the major one for sharing this sort of information. You see people sharing links and things like that. Problem with Twitter, of course, is, again, like memes, you're sort of limited to these little like short excerpts. You can only get, 140 characters? Maybe
yeah, I think it got lengthened, right?
I think it did. I don't know.
I think it is 140 now.
But certainly you can't distill a complex argument into very short snippets. So and like what I talked about with the journals, Twitter is sort of like a long conversation as well. Mm-hmm. That a single tweet is often part of sort of a long, maybe back and forth between a group of people. So just reading one single tweet can be very misleading there as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We can probably pop to the next slide.
Sure.
So peer review is a very interesting thing, and something I really wanted to touch on, which I would say distinguishes scholarly sources from just news articles, all these other sources of information that we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And what peer review really means is before a scholarly work can be published, it is first critically examined by experts in the field. And so if I wanted to publish an article on the work that I'm doing in my lab, I write up the paper, I submit it to the journal, and the journal editor takes that and then finds experts in the field, typically 3, sometimes more, and sends that out to them for their okay first as well. And so they come back, they're typically extremely critical, and they'll give you all sorts of reasons why you've made mistakes in your work. Those then get corrected, and if they're corrected to the satisfaction of the editor, only then does the article get published. So peer review is it's a great system for filtering out a lot of garbage, a lot of crap. It doesn't mean it catches everything. The peer review process is not perfect. You can see it can be pretty complicated. It can involve a lot of resubmissions and rewriting of material. I kind of think of the peer review process as being sort of like if you wanted to buy a used car and you took the used car and you weren't sure if this car was, reliable or not, right? Is this going to last? Is there something under the hood? And if you're like me, you're not an expert in how cars run. So you're not sure. So what you might do is take that car to a mechanic and have the mechanic look over the car and give his opinion or her opinion of the car before you would make that purchase. And so peer review is sort of the same way. It doesn't mean if the mechanic tells you, well, the car looks fine to me, and you go buy it and it breaks down a week later. That can still certainly happen, but a lot of lemons, a lot of bad cars would get caught by the mechanic, a lot of problems would, and so it really greatly reduces that, and it really helps scholarly work to be typically much more reliable than something that isn't peer reviewed.
Absolutely. And I think too, an important piece of this as well is just mentioning like what a redaction is. So not all papers, like we do, like you said, it will keep most of the lemons off the road, but sometimes a lemon paper will get through the peer review process, and it does happen. And I think one of the best examples that, that we've seen in the last few decades was the paper that was published connecting vaccines with autism. That paper, which I think most of us probably are aware of, that we at least know we are aware of the idea that's out there that vaccines cause autism. This one paper proved to, cause a ripple effect of misinformation, and that paper was redacted for, I think it was poor process, conclusions that didn't make sense. There was a number of reasons why it had to be retracted, but it still made it past peer review. So most of the lemons are off the road, but it doesn't happen all the time. And that's just important for us to always think of. Even when we're reading peer-reviewed articles, we still have to be critical.
Yeah. And this is where the currency argument comes back in again, too, because typically if one of those lemons does end up being published, if it ends up in the literature, follow-up work almost always exposes it and overturns it, right? So reading the most current arguments you can are typically the best way to go.
Absolutely. So I now have so why does it matter? Like, why should we care if something's peer reviewed or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, trying to make sure that everything is as trustworthy as possible. It's the same thing to me, I think, is if you go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes some medicine, and you go to the pharmacy and you pick up your prescription. You obviously don't want to take something that's dangerous to you, and you want to take something that's going to help you. So you expect that drug that you're taking has been tested for you, people like you in your situation, that they're, it's gone through the rigorous process to make sure that what you're putting into your body is trustworthy. And I think it's the exact same thing with information, and the peer review process is just that quality control process to make sure that information is trustworthy.
Absolutely.
So you don't want to be making decisions in your life based on information that is strongly biased one way or another, or playing into somebody else's hand to their benefit and not your own benefit.
Straight up inaccurate. Yeah, it's I was gonna think of it. I was about to say an example of something, but I totally lost it. Not only is this important, for making decisions in your life, but when it comes to your coursework and the things that you're submitting to your professors, having peer-reviewed materials is a way that you're ensuring that you're giving your professor accurate information and information from a good source. So very important for making our life choices, but also very important for our own scholarly work and being able to rely on the information that we're presenting in a paper or a project.
I have a question for you, Maggie.
Sure.
As a librarian, what's your opinion of Wikipedia as a source?
I actually think Wikipedia is a fair and reasonable place to start. Especially, like, I'll go there if I literally don't know anything about a topic. So I might start there, look at some of the keywords and terms they're using, check out their references, see what they're referencing, and then follow that trail of references. I wouldn't cite a Wikipedia article, because those can be manipulated and written by anyone. I know that there's like almost a community of people that will go in and like fact check and change things, but there's also people who go in and purposely change things to have misinformation. So I'm not totally against Wikipedia, and I think it's a good place to start and maybe check out their references, but I wouldn't reference it in my own work. I would look for better sources. But for me, if I'm just like, oh, what's that weird beetle or whatever, I might look it up in there and be like, oh, it's this thing, and then maybe look at their references if I want to see what they're looking to for information and if I want any more. But it's not what I would reference as like a scholarly source.
One nice thing about Wikipedia is it does have a list at the end of the article of references.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a great way to point me to the sort of relevant references in an area as well.
That's exactly it. You can check out their references. And I mean, I've been on Wikipedia articles where their references were really great. And then I've been on Wikipedia articles where the references led you to more misinformation, or not necessarily more misinformation, but just like not a great source, or the link was dead. The information didn't exist anymore. So it's touch or go. I mean, you can't, there's no blanket statement about Wikipedia that I could make, because I think it can be very useful in a lot of ways. But it's not something that I would like, oh, I'm going to make a life decision based on this Wikipedia article, or oh, I'm going to put this in my paper. But it's a really excellent place to start, in my opinion.
Maggie, I'm just noticing the time. It's 11:25. I'm wondering how much time you think we need to leave for questions.
Well, what I was going to do now, like I knew to begin with, we wouldn't have time to get into all these particular details in terms of how to find the best information. So maybe I can just point to these things, and we should be probably done in like 5-10 minutes, I'm guessing. We're almost at the end.
Yeah.
Great. So we're going to go kind of backtrack now to like finding that good information. And that was a question too, which is good, because we'll touch on sort of finding the most current and relevant information. One thing I do want to say about this section is though, we don't have time to go into like how to find scholarly articles specifically, and all the techniques that you need to actually be able to do that. So I really want to emphasize the importance of connecting with your librarian and going exploring some of the library resources yourself, because finding this stuff, I can point you to where to go, but doing it well is a whole other session. So I'll point you to some of the places that you can find this good information, and then you can ask more questions, or you can reach out to your librarian or your professor. So the first place to find those really great articles is using the databases that are on the library website, and to look for peer-reviewed material. You can use Google Scholar. Are you a Google Scholar user, Matt?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good source.
It is a good source. I find that maybe for my search techniques, it's not the most appropriate, because it's not its advanced searching is not for me, but you can use Google Scholar to find scholarly peer-reviewed articles, but you can also use the databases that are on the library website as well. And I will show you where those are after I get through this slide here, because we also have trustworthy newspapers that you can access through the library, and because we have an online collection. So I'm going to show you where you can find those as well. And then another tip is to actually look up book publishers to ensure that they're scholarly and peer-reviewed publications that they put out. Because a lot of people too might say, oh, it's a book and therefore it's a good source. But you can also publish books on all kinds of crap as well. So making sure that it's a scholarly press, like a university press, for example, UBC Press, Yale, MIT, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. There's all kinds of academic presses out there. So I really recommend looking at the publisher of your book that you're looking at, and seeing whether or not they actually have the authority to publish on something scholarly. But before I go into the next slide, I'll just show the website briefly. Here we go. There we go. So this is the Vaughan Memorial Library website, and there's this main search box here that you can use to search for books, articles, our databases, any number of materials or resources. But a quick way to get to our databases is just by scrolling down the page, going to our research resources, and we have a databases A to Z list here. One thing I will recommend, though, is that for each of the different programs that we have at Acadia, there's going to be a librarian dedicated to you. And on each of those guides that they've put together, let's visit one of mine. There's my dog Tippy. So let's go to my kinesiology guide. So in my kinesiology guide, I actually have tabs dedicated to different materials. So if you go to the journal article page, you're actually going to be able to see a list of all our academic databases that you can search through to find scholarly materials. And these are all picked out for kinesiology. So this is another way to get to those databases, to be looking for those peer-reviewed scholarly materials. We also have a newspaper guide as well. So if we go back to our LibGuides, I'm just going to scroll down. Here's a big list of all our guides. Maybe it's been I'm just going to go back to the home page then and do a search. Here we go. So this is a guide that's linked to a number of different guides, so you can go into the ones that are listed here. And we have a newspaper tab. There we go. So these ones are economic news that we have access to, but we also have all our newspaper databases here. So these are places that you can go to actually look for news that is, reliable and reputable and something that you can actually cite in your papers. Here we go. Just making sure that I covered that piece. Yep. Okay, so actually from here, maybe because I know what I have on the other slides, I'm just going to go to the tips and tricks for finding stuff on Google. So we'll just go to Google. Here it is. Now, what's a topic I should look up, Matt? There's so much.
Chemistry one, or do you want something else?
It could be anything.
How about how is COVID-19 spread?
Okay, so Google, this is a good thing to point out now, actually. So Google, you can pose questions like that to Google. You can say, how is COVID-19 spread? However, those databases that I was pointing out to you through the library website, they do not operate like that at all.
No.
You cannot pose questions to them. They will just say 0 results. So you would break that into different concepts like COVID-19 and spread or something along those lines. So that's just a quick tip. Google operates quite differently from the academic databases. So if you're searching in academic databases, you can't pose questions to them because it'll likely just get you 0 results. So let's just do, how is COVID-19 spread? I'll just go with transmitted. There we go.
That works.
Okay, so this is just your classic Google search. But there's a number of different ways that you can actually sort of sort through this information that's coming at you. If you go to settings, or no, tools, sorry, you can choose something like the news tab. So you're getting the news, but you can also go to, all news or blogs. You can get the most recent, the past hour, and you can sort by relevance or you can sort by date. So there's a number of ways for you to get the most recent news stories. But again, Google's not saying, oh, this is a good news source, this is a bad news source. This is just news sources. So here you really have to apply that critical thinking when you're looking at your news results and picking which ones that you actually want to look to. But that is how you get the most recent news using a Google search or using those tools. One thing I do want to point to is the advanced search. Where is my advanced search? Did they move it? Am I missing it? Search settings? Nope. What is going on? So I'm just going to look for Google Advanced Search because I can't find it in my list.
No.
That's weird. There we go. So this does any number of things, but the main thing that I want to point out on this site, let's just do COVID-19 transmission, is your ability to do site searching. Now, this is the number one thing that I point students to. I use it myself. With this tool, site or domain, you can actually search the domain of your choosing. So for example, for this, I'm going to type in .gc.ca. So that means that I'm only looking at COVID-19 transmission information from government websites. So this can be useful in any number of ways, especially if you're searching Stats Canada, because Stats Canada can be very hard to search, but you can actually use this to search Stats Can sites. So the site or domain piece here can be really, really important when you're searching for government information or information specific to an organization. And you can actually search for file types. So you can search for PDFs on COVID-19 transmission from a government website. And if I hit search, here we go. Everything I'm getting are PDFs from the government surrounding COVID-19. And again, it's Google, so it's going to bring you back all kinds of things, but this sort of sorts through all the crap that you're going to get back, essentially. And then it's up to you to go through those particular results and use your critical thinking to determine which ones are going to be useful for you and what you need to be informing yourself with. So that's a little tip and trick for that. This is one of my favorite things. I use it constantly because it makes it so much easier to search through, search for government information or something particular to a certain organization. So I just want to make sure that I'm make sure I cover all the things while I'm in that window. Yep, Google Advanced Searching, government websites, always really great, and always applying the CRAAP test online. So is there anything else there, Matt, that I should be including? Do you have any Google tips or tricks that you use for finding?
Not really. I mean, I don't use the advanced settings as often as I ought to.
They're pretty cool.
I just put it in there and I look, and then sometimes it's 3 or 4 pages in before I find what I need. But
yes,
yeah.
Oh, that's actually a really great point, though. Is sometimes the information you're looking for is not going to be in the first page of results, and that's for a number of different reasons, algorithms, and there's ads, there's monetary exchange for getting placed in certain Google results. So there's ways that people can manipulate where their results appear in a Google search. So sometimes you do have to go a few pages in to actually find what you're looking for, and critical eye the entire time. So I'm just going to, can you see my screen, the presentation, Matt?
Not yet. I still see the web page.
Okay, so I have to, yeah. Let's do this. There we go.
We're back.
We're back. I'm just going to skip through a few things. Yes, the Google Advanced Search is what I did. Perfect. So we talked about a lot today, and like finding that good information is a whole kind of other kettle of fish that it could be a whole 2-hour session on finding that information. Hopefully, looking at the library website and some tips and tricks there will help, but you can always ask your librarian. You can ask me, or you can find your librarian depending on your program in that list of librarians on the library webpage. You can ask your professor. So if you have a source that you're just like, I don't know if this is good or not. I mean, Matt and I both talked about how some things can look really legitimate, and it can happen a lot in the scholarly world. Like you find a paper and it looks really legitimate, but in fact it's not. You can always actually ask your professor about your sources as well. We do have a tutorial on the library webpage that you can check out. If you just look up our tutorials in that main search box on the home bar, you'll be able to find them in the website box. We have one called Research It Right, and it talks a little bit more about how to research things properly, evaluate sources, and find that good information. You can also contact ref-desk@acadiau.ca if you have any reference questions and or questions about the library at all as well. And on the library homepage, you'll soon be able to find a live help widget. This is a chat box that allows you to talk with librarians across the province, should no one be available to help you right away. Our photo credits, and I think that's it. Did we leave anything out, Matt? We were just sort of spitballing through some of that. And
I think we were very thorough.
yes, we went far longer. So when we get into the memes, right? I always want to talk about memes.
I'm sure the questions will expose where the gaps were.
Oh, exactly. Yes, absolutely. So I think we're happy to take questions. Should I just stop sharing altogether? There.
Sure. Thanks, Maggie. I think I don't think you need to share anymore unless somebody asks something about a specific resource. So thanks so much. Thank you so much, Matt and Maggie. That was fantastic. Like you said, it was thorough, but I really enjoyed the tone and the information you shared. So thank you so much. Hopefully all the participants who are here got something out of the session. I'm sure they did.
Yes.
It's always great to sort of have a lighthearted tone, but still be, covering important information. So thanks for that. It was interesting when you were talking about the sort of looking at the Fox News and looking at the CNN, Matt. I was thinking about, I don't know that I really think of it quite the same way as you do in terms of the sort of, it's somewhere in the middle, but I do really make an effort to follow resources that are sort of from different swaths of society or ways of thinking, because I think it's important not to be in an echo chamber. And for me, that's my motivation for it. It's less about finding the average and more about not finding myself in an echo chamber. So anyway, that was my little take on that part of it. So for questions, one of the questions that we had, I think you addressed in your presentation, but unless either of you want to add anything to this, do you have any tips for finding the most current and accurate information on any topic, especially when it's changing so often? I think you covered that, but are there any things you want to highlight on that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because what I demonstrated was like how to find the most current news story, just using Google. But when it comes to using our academic databases, you can actually isolate your results to only show you the most recently published, it was published in the last year, those materials. So there are ways in academic databases to either sort your results to show you the most current, or the sort feature, or there's a filter on the side that allows you to sort of isolate a certain time period for publication. So that's another thing that I use pretty regularly in terms of like just being able to sort my results and see the most current things when I'm using academic databases. I don't know, is there any other ways that you can think of, Matt? That's sort of my most
tip. Obviously it depends on the sort of information you're looking for.
Yeah.
If it's information on environment or health or medicine or things like that, again, I just put another plug in for the government websites like Health Canada, Environment Canada, because they have, they hire experts in those areas, dozens of experts whose job it is to keep on top of the most current information. And you see these websites get regularly updated, regularly revised with information as it appears. So those are very current as well.
Yeah, you're right. Like it really depends on the kind of information you're looking for. Whether you're looking for the most current peer-reviewed paper on a topic is one thing, but if it's, you want to look to a government website for, something that was published like that day on COVID-19, like that is a good source because, well, scholarly communication is incredibly important, but it can also take some time. So, that's why some of these papers that come out, especially in medicine, can become, obsolete within, a very short period of time. So the most current scholarly information is going to be different, than the peer-reviewed articles you find. It might be different than what you find on, a government website. So it really depends on, the kind of information you're looking for. That's a big part of it. I think those are my tips.
Yeah.
I think there's no other questions at this point.
Oh man, we covered a good ground, I think.
Nailed.
I have to say you really did. It really was a very informative presentation today. So thanks so much for that.
Oh yeah, happy to. And one thing I guess I just want to emphasize is that I feel this way at the end of every presentation, but there's so much more information on this, and there's probably a billion questions that will come up along the way as students are looking for that information. It's, now there might not be any questions, but when they get into their coursework and start looking for materials and looking for sources, I can't emphasize enough how much help is available either through the library, through your professor, because now it seems like maybe an easy thing to, I can definitely go out and find this now, but you might run into issues in the future when you're trying to write a paper. So help is out there, and we did talk about a lot of things, and there's a lot of nuances and complexities to this content. So I can't emphasize asking for help enough, because we are all there to provide guidance on this particular topic.
And I'll just say that Erin Patterson was in a session on Friday, and she definitely really brought forth the importance of using library resources to help you as you're seeking out information. And she was specifically talking about plagiarism and citing sources, but obviously that ties in very, very well with what both of you were talking about today. As well, on Friday, we actually have another session that Erin Patterson is going to be participating in that will also be talking about information services that are available, like not just the library, but generally information services on campus. So I think that will also tie in really, really well. And together, I think these three sessions really do show how it isn't just in the classroom that you're accessing faculty members. The librarians are also there as faculty members to support your learning and also to help you find the information you need so that you can, give credible information, find good information, all of that. So I certainly greatly value the work that you do in the library, and I know that that we all do. So
thank you so much. And I'm glad that there's multiple sessions, because I think Matt made a really good point about coming into a conversation or like a series of tweets. One tweet might seem out of context, and I find with this information, sometimes you need those other pieces to kind of make the most sense of what we're talking about. So I'm glad there's going to be multiple sessions, because you couldn't cover it all just in one go, and those other sessions really do complement what we talked about today and support this content. So super happy that there's multiple sessions, because there's lots for the library to offer and your professors. So I'm really pleased that we were able to do this.
So I haven't seen any other questions appear in the Q&A over the last few minutes. So I think with this, unless either of you have any final thoughts to share, then I think we will end off the session, unless you have anything else.
No.
Just reach out for help if you need it. That's my final message. There's lots of us here to help point students in the right direction in terms of sources and any other issues finding information. So that's my final message. Reach out. Meet your librarian.
Yeah, I second that. I second that recommendation for sure.
Yeah.
I third it. I definitely recommend reaching out to the librarians. I recommend reaching out to your faculty members who are teaching you courses, and other credible experts, so to speak.
Yes, ask the experts.
So thank you everybody who attended today. Thanks for coming. We hope you got something out of this session, and feel free to reach out to people through our website. You can find various email addresses and such to get information as you need it. So thank you so much for being here, and hope to see many of you again tomorrow for our morning academic session. So have a wonderful day, everyone, and thanks for being here. Bye.
Bye,
See you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.